So Kent Krober is a long-time GU fan. He went to school here. He was an admissions counselor here. He was the athletic director here. And he'll tell you a little bit more about his time here. His parents are the Krober Room, named after the Krober Room. But he said that his claim to fame these days is being Claire's uncle. So that's his claim to fame right now. Would you please help me welcoming Kent Krober?
Key verse for today. Is that up on the screen? Yes. Ephesians 2:10 is just where it's at. I was at a board meeting last night at Free Methodist Church, and Pastor Deb opened up with Ephesians 2:10. And here I am speaking on it, and Kenzie brought it up. So God works in amazing ways. I'm here to share a story. If Jesus is the Lord of your life, listen closely, because you may experience something very similar to what I'm going to tell you. My story begins with my marriage to Sandy in 1976. She was my Greenville High School and Greenville College sweetheart. God knew that Sandy would trust him in directing our paths over the years. We were married the day after Christmas of our junior year here at Greenville. We were both teacher education majors, and God opened a door for our first jobs at a Christian school in Nassau, Bahamas. Kingsway Academy hired Sandy to teach third grade and me to teach phys ed, junior high science, and health. A whole new adventure began for us as minorities in a different culture a long way from home. It was God preparing in advance. We then moved to Central Indiana to teach and coach with some of our best friends from Greenville College. Greenville College, because that's what it was. I know it's GU. But we started our family in Indiana with a son named Kyle, and Sandy was pregnant 2 years later with Rachel. I received a phone call while in Indiana from Greenville College asking if I would be interested in coming to work in the admissions office and help coach men's basketball. God's timing seemed right with us for this move home. With a 2-year-old and a newborn, having both sets of proud grandparents in town, it was wonderful. God was preparing in advance by bringing us back to Greenville. So in 1982, I began a 19-year career here at Greenville, while Sandy became an amazing stay-at-home mom with Kyle and Rachel for the next 10 years. It was a real challenge financially with my salary, but Sandy was gifted in making money stretch, and on paydays each month, we celebrated by going to McDonald's for Happy Meals. Our parents made sure we didn't starve, though. We learned to trust God in new ways. I coached men's basketball here at GC for 13 years while in the admissions office, and then spent 6 more years as the director of alumni and church relations. Sandy kept my Illinois State teacher's license up to date for the 19 years I've been working at GC, paying $5 per year and disregarding my plea to stop wasting $5. I didn't understand, but it was God, preparing in advance for something neither one of us had a clue about. In 2001, Sandy was teaching third grade here in Greenville. My son Kyle was finishing his sophomore year here at GC, and my daughter Rachel was a senior in high school here in town, looking forward to starting at Greenville in the fall. One of the advantages of working at GC is that your children are given free tuition. We were planning on free tuition for 6 more years. In March of 2001, I was with the GC choir on their spring break concert tour, meeting with donors and alumni in Ohio and Michigan. The choir stopped and presented a short concert in an inner-city high school in Toledo, Ohio, and presented a short concert with a large African-American student body. I remembered being very comfortable there, even thinking that a teacher and a coach could really have a meaningful influence on the students and athletes. It was God preparing in advance. We then headed to Michigan, and I was driving a school van behind the coach bus with Michael Ritter, who was with me, who was director of admissions, and he was recruiting students, when it happened. I heard these words: I have kids in East St. Louis that you can help if you are willing. Shook me up. I heard those words. It wasn't internal. I heard them. My hair was standing up on my neck. My eyes started tearing up. I got goosebumps, and my heart rate just jumped. I looked over at Michael Ritter, and obviously he was just looking straight ahead. He hadn't heard those words, but it was that real. As I drove over the next 3 hours into Michigan, I started making a list of pros and cons in my mind as to why I should consider what I heard. The con side was about 5 times longer than the pro side. Did I really hear what I thought he said? He said, if I'm willing. So he would understand if I decided not to go, right? He gave me that out, if I'm willing. If you don't know, East St. Louis has fallen on hard times over the last 40 years with much crime, violence, killings, few open jobs, drug abuse, and tough for families to stay together. That night, March 28, I opened the devotional book I was using that year, My Utmost for My Highest, with Oswald Chambers. And this is the 28th when he called me and I heard those words. Here's the devotional for March 28. The title is, Isn't There Some Misunderstanding? Just because I don't understand what Jesus has said, I have no right to determine that he must be mistaken in what he said. When I begin to weigh the pros and cons, and doubts and debate enter into my mind, I'm bringing an element that is not of God. This will only result in my concluding that his instructions to me were not right. Many of us are faithful to our ideas about Jesus Christ, but how many of us are faithful to Jesus himself? Faithfulness to Jesus means that I must step out even when and where I can't see anything. Are you debating whether you should take a step of faith in Jesus or whether you should wait until you can see clearly how to do what he has asked? Simply obey him and with unrestrained joy. Whatever he says to you, do it. I didn't sleep very well that night, and I thought, how did he move this devotional from somewhere else of 365 devotions to March 28? Amazing, because it's exactly what I was going through that day. It was God preparing in advance. I did not say a word to Sandy about what had happened on the trip when I got home. Instead, I made an appointment with the superintendent of the East St. Louis School District, District 189. My plan was to be honest with him, tell my story, and hear the response, secretly hoping he would tell me there was no way he would hire me. Here's another God preparing in advance moment. When I sat down in his office, his radio was playing gospel music, and the song My Redeemer Lives by Nicole C. Mullen was playing. After 20 minutes of hearing me out, he gave me an application and asked me to send it back to him personally. He then introduced me to Mr. Coleman, the director of personnel, who told me to watch the website for new openings. That night, with extreme nervousness, I got up and shut the TV off and told Sandy I had something to tell her. The look on her face was quite scary, because I never turn the TV off to talk. I told her what had transpired over the last week and a half. The following week was eerily quiet around our house, except for some times of tears with Kleenex. Why did God not speak to Sandy's heart in preparation for what I was going to share? He could have, but he didn't. On the Sunday after I had told Sandy, Rich Beans sang this song by Stephen Curtis Chapman titled Dive in church at the Free Methodist Church that following Sunday. So we're going to play that now.
Carried here to where the river flows. Yeah, my heart is racing and my knees are weak as I walk to the edge. I know there is no turning back once my feet have left the ledge. And in the rush, I hear a voice that's telling me it's time to take the leap of faith. So here I go. I'm not life, and it can fill an empty soul and give a heart the only thing worth living and worth dying for. Yeah. But we will never know the awesome power of the grace of God until we let ourselves get swept away into this holy flood. So if you'll take my hand, we'll close our eyes and count to 3 and take the leap of faith. Come on, let's go. I'm diving in, I'm going deep. Get on my head, I wanna be crawling in the rust, lost in the flow. Get on my head, I wanna go really deep.
Yeah, you can go ahead and shut it off. Well, you get the idea. What Sandy and I had just been going through the week after, had no idea, and Rich Bean sings this song. And let's see. Sandy and I talked about that song a little later, and she shared at the time she did not appreciate God arranging for Rich to sing that song. She felt, and this is a serious thing, she felt like she couldn't question or oppose the idea since it came from God. Otherwise, she would feel like Satan tempting me away from the calling that God had given me. Tough spot for a wife, for Sandy. The next 3 months were very challenging as I pursued employment with District 189. I wish I could tell you that it was an easy process, but my paperwork was misplaced, important documents bypassed appropriate desks, and the superintendent never saw my application. It seemed like Satan was at work. Lessons learned. Just because God calls us to be obedient does not mean you can sit back and wait for doors to open. You have to push and work. I was a certified teacher because my wife had been paying $5 a year for 19 years to keep my teacher's license up to date. If she'd not done that, I would have had to go back to college for at least another semester for refresher classes that over 19 years that I needed to be certified again. Again, God preparing the way over all those years. Sandy didn't know why, but he had her doing that. I was offered a job on June 27 as a junior high science teacher and a 7th grade boys basketball coach at Lincoln Middle School. God at work. I now had to face one of the hardest conversations of my life. We had life all planned. Now our financial future was not clear. If I followed what I knew God had planned, I would take a sizable pay cut, nearly $10,000 a year in salary, to teach at ESL. Because of the age of 43, I would come onto the teacher's pay scale with 3 years of experience, equivalent to a 25-year-old. My master's degree in coaching pay would help me get maybe 1 year higher on the pay scale. But adding 2 hours of commuting every day from Greenville to East St. Louis and losing free tuition for the next 6 years by leaving Greenville, it was scary. My human nature began to creep in as I thought about the leading from God as too costly for my family. That was June 27 when I got the offer. And here was the June 27 devotional. The overshadowing of God's personal deliverance. From Jeremiah 1:8, I am with you to deliver you, says the Lord. That is all God promises his children. Wherever God sends us, he will guard our lives. Our personal property and possessions are to be a matter of indifference to us, and our hold on these things should be very loose. If this is not the case, we will have panic, heartache, and distress. The Sermon on the Mount indicates that when we are on a mission for Jesus, there is no time to stand up for ourselves. Jesus says, in effect, don't worry about whether or not you are being treated justly. Looking for justice is actually a sign that we have been diverted from our devotion to him. Never look for justice in this world, but never cease to give it. If we look for justice, we will only begin to complain and to indulge ourselves in the discontent of self-pity, as if to say, why should I be treated like this? If we are devoted to Jesus, we have nothing to do with what we encounter, whether it is just or unjust. In essence, Jesus says, continue steadily on with what I have told you to do, and I will guard your life. Again, it's a God thing to have that for that devotional for that day. I did accept the offer with Sandy's support for this new journey. Sandy, stand up real quick and you're part of this. Come on, there's Sandy. So after I'd accepted the job, we'd never said anything to our kids until this was down the road. At a Sunday dinner at home, we shared the news for the first time with Kyle and Rachel. Kyle's response was, "Cool." Rachel's response was quite different. Through tears, she said, "Dad, you may be killed." After a few weeks, my family was on board and trusting God for this new adventure. After 3 months of working through God's calling, I was now free to tell my story and resign from Greenville after 19 years. My first day at Lincoln Middle School was just for teachers. The principal, Liberta Allen, had the teachers come to the gym for introductions and announcements. 50 teachers, 47 African Americans and 3 Caucasians, of which I was one of them, came to the gym in about the same ratio as when we went to the Bahamas. So that was good preparation to be in this situation again years later. When she was done speaking, she announced that if you don't believe in Jesus, she said, we will wait for you to go ahead and go to your classroom to prepare for tomorrow. For those who love Jesus, we're going to come down to the gym floor, form a circle, and pray for our babies who are coming tomorrow. This is a public school. God knew where he was sending me. My 4 years at East St. Louis changed our family in wonderful ways. If you'll start showing some of the pictures, that'd be good. Each year, I would bring my basketball team to Greenville to watch a GU basketball game, eat at Mario's, swim in the annex pool, spend the night in our basement, and then attend church before heading back home. My last team made it to the state tournament for middle schools in Illinois. We lost by 1 point to the team that went on to become the state champions. We even had 6 of my co-teachers from East St. Louis come to Greenville, visit our Free Methodist Church on a Sunday morning, and come out to our home for Sunday dinner. God was good. He used my daughter, Rachel, who remember cried and said, you may die if you take this job. He used my daughter, Rachel, in a powerful way during my first year. In the early days, I would bring my sack lunch from home and eat in my room where it would be quiet for 20 minutes. My environment was so challenging, strange, and hot. There was no air conditioning in my room, that I would open my lunch from home and I would embrace that wonderful peanut butter and jelly sandwich that I'd made earlier that morning because it was from home and it was comforting. You talk about comfort food. It was really neat. After one of my most difficult days early in that first year, I got in my car at home, headed to the front door when I noticed Rachel sitting on the porch swing. She took one look at me and realized that I was beat. She gave me a big hug. The next day when I opened my sack lunch, I found this note. Daddy, I'm praying for you, especially today. I know you've had hard, shocking, frustrating weeks. I really hope it gets better. I know you can do this, Dad. It just takes some adjustment, I'm sure. Just be glad it's the weekend. I love you, Rach. Well, before the class came back after lunch, I'd wiped my tears because I was pretty emotional for my daughter to support me when she was so scared to begin with. By Christmas break, I felt right at home. Teachers and staff were helpful and encouraging. After my second year, we moved into a brand new school with all the great equipment I needed for science labs and air conditioning. One evening while I was at basketball practice, we heard a car horn honking outside the gym doors. A grandmother who lived across the street from the school, whom I never met, knew me and my car. She was on her porch and she witnessed 2 guys break into my car in the parking lot and started hot wiring it to steal it. They broke the window and 2 of them were in there and they were hot wiring the car. She got in her car, drove across the street, and honked very loud and long to chase them away. They did leave, left the tools in my car. She then backed up to the gym doors on the grass because she knew I was in basketball practice, and she honked the horn, and so I sent a boy out and said, see what's going on with the horn. I sent a player out, and we learned what she had done. I realized that people knew about me and were looking out for me. God had planned to cover me. After 4 years at Lincoln, several critical things changed that made my job much, much more difficult. And I felt a release from God after those 4 years. But he is so good, he had the next move all prepared as well. He opened a door at the University of Missouri St. Louis for employment that offered the largest salary I had ever enjoyed. And I was already used to the commuting. This salary helped us pay off the $35,000 that we lost from the free tuition for our 2 children. He also opened amazing opportunities at UMSL for me to share Jesus with many of my colleagues, vice presidents, and alumni. At a state university, if you want to share Jesus on campus as an employee, it has to be before work, during lunch, or after work. Many situations arose during my 8 years there when God opened doors for a faith conversation and prayer during working hours. The first time this happened, I was called into my vice president's office for a first warning. God continued to give me ministry opportunities over the years, often during working hours. I was never challenged again by anybody from the administration, and when I left, they thanked me for the times of prayer and Bible study, and God opened the door, and He had prepared the way for that. 5 years ago, God opened the door for me to come back home to GU to help with athletics and fundraising. In 2018, it was good to retire from my favorite place. Please take advantage of being at GU and believe the truth of this poem by Philip Brewer. Please stand and let's read in closing. Let's read this together. 5 loaves and 2 fishes. God uses what you have to fill a need you never could have filled. God uses where you are to take you where you never could have gone. God uses what you can do to accomplish what you never could have done. God uses who you are to let you become who you never could have been. I'm praying that each of you will experience the amazing journey God has for you. He's planned it, He's opening doors, and He's watching over you. He will prepare the way. Thanks for listening.